Hello everyone. In this video we're going to continue the Python basics. We're going to go over two very universal programming concepts, loops and also conditionals. So let's get to it. We start with loops. Basically loops are when we want to do the same thing or do a number of things but the same thing for a couple of different times. That's basically loop. So here I have a list of lists and I wanted to do my loops for these elements. We have different types of loops. So we have for loops and while loop. So let's start with for loop. So for example, I want to see all of the elements of my list. So I say this is the syntax. This is the actually most common syntax in Python. We have for, then we have element, and we say in that collection, colon, and then whatever you want to do. So pay attention, this element is something we are creating for the purpose of this loop. So I could call this element random stuff and copy that random stuff and just run this. I will need to run these first. And then it will do the purpose of the loop. So when we say e or we say element, it's for the purpose of making this more intuitive. And also making this a little bit readable. So a lot of times you could just say e. So if I say e, it's very readable, it's small, it doesn't take a lot of space, but at the same time you understand what you mean by e. You mean like the element of that in that collection. One of the things that I want you all to start doing is to start doing your loops the way that Python prefers. So the reason is we are going to be learning a lot of modules that are developed around these ways of programming. I'm pretty sure that if you have minimal or a little bit of exposure to programming, when you want to do loop, you sort of use that normal way of older way of doing loops, which is for from I to this number, and then that number has to be the same numbers of list, and then you get access to that. Why don't we just look at that as an example? So for example, you could say let's do a loop with while loop. So I create an index I and I say while I is smaller or equal to smaller than 3. So I have 3 elements, or I know I have 2 index. So index 0, 1, and 2. So I create that condition here and say print my list, that index, and I create that counter here that every time this is done, my index goes up 1 more. So once I gets to 3, I don't need this anymore because I already have printed the index 2. I just stop running. So that's when this loop stops. So once you run this, you will basically get the same thing, but there are a lot of hassles that you had to go through to create this loop. You had to sort of create that whole structure of your loop yourself. You had to create when it has to end. You had to take charge of the index, but all you wanted was to access the elements of that list. So why not just start using these types of looping? Because a lot of times when we loop, we are going to loop through all of our columns in a data or through all of our rows in a data. The third way of doing that loop is basically having a for structure instead of while, but creating collections of indexes that you want to go through those collections of indexes. So you say for I, those indexes, range 3, and then print that. Let's print this first. This does the same thing as the other ones, but let's see what this is. I mean, when we say range 3, what is that basically doing for us? Range 3 is basically a collections between 0, 1, like collections of indexes from 0 to 3. It's going to be 0, 1, 2. This is range 3. So that's basically doing the same thing, but you're looping through that collection instead of looping through your list. And it creates a little bit of more hassle. You have to like use the index to get access to your collection. So I highly recommend to sort of like set aside what you know, the way you want to go about doing loops. I know it might just seem easier to go with what you're more comfortable with, but I cannot stress that enough. If you don't change that now, you're going to have difficulty applying what you're learning in this course in the coming assignment and coming modules. So go through the difficulty now. So if you are finding yourself trying to do while loop or creating range, ask yourself, is there an easier way, or is there the way that I should doing it in a Python way? And do that one, because that's why we're really going through these loops here, because loops are not difficult concepts or things to do. They're like fundamental, but I'm pretty sure if you have taken any programming language, you've already gone through it once at least. So yes, try to use the loop in this way. Just try to like change your mentality around programming language. So a good thing we want to learn, this is sort of like tangential to loops. A lot of times they are used in loops, but these are placeholders that you can use in a string to sort of say, this is a string I want to have, but every time I come here, I want to have a different value here. So you basically use these placeholders in many loops a lot of times, but they're not completely related to loops. So basically they are like templates. So if I create this template of a string template and I say, hi, this is, I want something to be here, and my last name is, I want something to be here. So if I say that and they say my string, percentage sign, parentheses, Ruhollah goes to the first part of the first placeholder, and then Jafari goes to the second placeholder. So if I run this, it will put Ruhollah in that placeholder and then Jafari in the second placeholder. So if I change this to Roy, this simply changed the whole message. So you can use this in a loop. So for example, I create my template. I say, hi, this is an automated message intends to remind you of your class tomorrow. So in my first list, which was the number of people, if I run that here, so if I have my list 1, it basically is just a number of like collections of people's name. So I put that into people and say, okay, for person in people, print that template based on the person you have in this collection. So once I run this, I get the different messages. Hi, Emily, this is an automated message, and so on and so forth for all of them in that loop. Sometimes you do want to have the index while you're doing the loop. I mean, you just want to like be able to say use that index in your message, or like you just, for some reason within that loop you need that index. So there are different ways to go about this. The first way to go about this is to sort of change from what we said, it's better way of doing loops. So instead of doing in people, we could say in range number of loops, and the number of loops is the length of people. And then you use that index to specify which person comes to put here, and also use that index to say you are which number on the list. So if I run this, I will have all of those messages working and everything is looking good. But the problem with this loop is the fact that the structure of your loop structure, the loop structure is created by something outside of that collection. So you have to find these numbers of loops and then create that, and it's creating not only messiness but also creates vulnerability of your codes for specific purposes that might make your code even like logically, or make it goes through errors because of different reasons that it's hard to mention here. So it's better to use the other way of doing this. So you could use something, a function called enumerate. Basically, when you say enumerate people, you're still using people as your whole structure of the whole structure of the loop, but also you get to have an index and also have the elements, which is the person here. So you don't have to you say people I, and you just like have that person, which is more intuitive, and then you also get to have your own index. So this is the recommended way of doing loops in this example, this course, and also like when you're using Python for data analytics. And it's important to pay attention that it's more intuitive, but also you get to have your index, and highly recommended to do your loops this way. So if you find yourself trying to do other ways of doing loops, make sure that you remember my advice, that you want to start being comfortable with these way of doing loops. So another example, I want to report people's GPA with their name. So I can create that range of, using that loop with the range. This is the same thing, but like in the other example, I had put it out and like it said number of loops, basically the same thing. And I say people index and then GPA index. Before we look at this, let's see what these looks like. So people, so this is the list of people, and this is the list of GPAs. So I have these two lists. I want to like create a message using these two lists. I know the numbers of items I have are the same. So if I create a loop with the numbers of items that are corresponding to both of the lists, I will be able to do this task. And I use a template that says the first part comes from the people and the second part comes from the GPAs. And I run this, and it do this thing. I mean, it does the trick. It does the job. But the better way of doing this would have been to create the loop based on the main list, and then use that index to get what you want from the second list. I believe if you compare the computational time of these two, they're going to be fairly similar. But still, this is better for the purpose of make your code making more intuitive sense, and also at the same time it's less messy, and also it protects you from possible programming mistakes if you do your codes this way. The next thing we're going to cover here is nested loops. Well, I mean, nested loops, I'm pretty sure you're aware of it, is basically having loops inside loops, and sometimes they become very important. So being able to actually go about wrapping your mind around nested loops is a key programming skill. So we probably try to, have some practice in this module. So for example, I want to create a nested loop. So I create a list, create a loop that goes inside, that gives the list of my first level loop. So I get an inside list every time the elements of this first level loop, or that this bigger list is a list. So it's an inside list. So within that inside list, I do another loop, which is an element. So now I get to print these elements. So if I run this, I start dissecting all of the small elements of my loop. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the names, and then the GPAs. So I mean, this is my list, but like within 2 loops, I was able to get every and each and element out of it with using 2 loops. So another example, if I wanna attribute all of the possibility of adjectives, these 3 adjectives, with these 3 fruits. So I have the loops for adjectives, and I have loops for fruits, and now I combine these 2. So all of the possibilities of the adjectives and the fruits being sit next to one another are created using these nested loop. You will see an example in one of the challenges and in the assignment how to use nested loops. I mean, they are basically a matter of practice to be able to wrap your mind around them. And finally, in this video, we will go over the conditionals. So the conditionals are really the way that you go about creating Booleans that allows you to check different things or continue your codes based on different events that comes to happen in your environment. So here, for example, in this here, I want to check the number that comes to the program here if it's even or odd. So for example, my number is 51. I get its remainder by using the remainder function, which is percentage sign in the Python language. And then I check if the remainder is 0, it means it's even. If it's not, it's odd. So I basically say if it's, odd, it's odd. So if I change this to an even number, let's say 46, now it's even. And if I run this again and again, it's going to be the same thing because the number 46 hasn't changed. But if I change this to an odd number, and now it's going to give me an odd. So it's the way we use conditions. But basically, pay attention. What goes on in these parentheses for a conditional or if statement is basically a Boolean. So if I run this, it's going to tell me if it's true or false, and it's a Boolean. So if I were to change this code and put 1 here, regardless of the numbers I have here, this is always going to be this is even, because this finds it's at 1, and 1 is between 0 and 1. 1 is true. That's why it sees it as true and always do that this is an even number. If I were to put this 0 here, it would always pay attention as this as false, and therefore it would say even without regardless of the number, because the statement that the boolean that goes here is regardless of that number. But if I want to change that, create a boolean that is based on what is the environment is having, then that's when I can use that for see if the number is even or odd. So there we go. So there are different expressions in Python. This is for equality. If its remainder is equal to 0, you don't use just 1. This is assignment. This is not expression. It's an assignment. You are saying remainder is equal to 0, and so you're going to get an error if you did this. So you want to have the equality sign, which is a double equals. Smaller than, less than or equal, less than, greater than or equal, less than or equal. Not equal is with exclamation mark, and equal is different than is equal. It's basically use that for checking if something the same element as the other one. I mean, if we put is here, it's going to still work because is sort of more general than the equal sign. Equal sign is like less specific. That's why both of them works here. Is not the the reverse of is, and then n is something we already see in the string if this element is in the other collection, and is not n is the antithesis of n basically.